Hey everybody, thanks for joining us on Classic Mini DIY today. For today's job, we're going to be replacing the oil in your Mini's carburetor dash pots. Job's pretty straightforward and doesn't require a lot of tools, but as you can see it still does require a few. What you're going to need is carb and choke cleaner, a small oil filler can or a small funnel, which you can use to pour the oil into the dash pots, a flathead screwdriver to get the dash pot covers off, and a pair of latex or nitrile gloves that you can use to keep the oil off your hands. Now you're also going to need the oil for the dash pot. Now the oil that you're going to need to use varies from car to car. So I've included some information in the details below with information on which oil you're going to need for your car. For this car, which is a little tuned and has a fast road cam, you're going to need a 0 weight 20 fully synthetic motor oil. But other cars require standard SU motor oil and a series of other different motor oils that can be used across the board. So follow the link below in the comment section and that'll get you sorted out and get you the right oil for your car. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, let's get started. The engine we're working on today is a 1275. This 1275 has a dual carburetor setup, and this car uses the HS2 carburetors. Now each one of these carburetors have something called a dash pot on them, and that's this unit right here, the silver unit. This has an oil reservoir in it which allows a float inside that carburetor to move up and down, allowing more or less air-fuel mixture into the car as air is pouring into these filters. What happens sometimes is the oil becomes low or misbalanced between these two carburetors. If you're on a single carb, generally you don't have to worry about the whole synchronization between the two carburetors, and the oil may just be low, or you're wanting to switch the oil for something a little bit more suited for the car. Alright, to remove these dash pots it's pretty simple. First, there's this screw off top, which you're going to unscrew and set to the side. Make sure that stays clean. That has a little plunger in it that will be covered in oil when you pull that out. And then there are two flathead screws on the dash pot, one here and then one on the back side over here. So once you unscrew all those, a small spring is going to come out. Make sure you keep that spring. It's very important, otherwise the float's not going to properly actuate. And also make sure this whole dash pot stays upright, otherwise you're going to get oil all over. So I'm going to set the camera down, go ahead and take both of the dash pots off, and we can move forward from there. Alright, so right here is the actual float itself. While you are taking this out, note the oil's inside this small reservoir here. Make sure you're really careful not to mess up this tip here, this is very important. And we are going to set this off to the side, and if you can see in there, there's the oil. We're going to pour that out into our waste oil container. Alright, so dash pots are off. You'll see that it looks like there's a little bit of oil residue around here. So I'm going to get some carb and choke cleaner. I'm going to clean all this off. And then I'm also going to clean off our dash pot assembly. So as you can see here, I've laid it out. We have the plungers up at the top, the screws that came out for the dash pot covers, the dash pot covers themselves, the spring that's inside that allows this float to move up and down. So this is the float that we're going to be testing once we fill these reservoirs back up with oil. So I'm going to go ahead and clean these, and I'll be back in a minute to reassemble and put some oil in the new dash pots. Alright, we've got our clean carburetors, and we also have our clean dash pot and plunger assembly. We didn't spend a whole lot of time cleaning these plungers. Those are going to be coated with oil most of the time anyway, so you don't want to remove any sort of lubrication that's on those. Next step is to go ahead and reassemble these dash pots. Make sure that the carb and choke cleaner that you use to clean these carburetors is all dry. Otherwise, the explosion that you're going to get when you first start your car is going to be pretty exciting. So I'm going to set this down and go ahead and get these reinstalled. So while you're reinstalling these, you'll notice a small ridge on the side of your dashpot. There's a notch on the inside of your carburetors that this ridge is going to slide right into. So take that and make sure that needle falls right into the little hole in there in the carburetor, and then lightly let it fall back down in there. You don't need a lot of pressure on that, otherwise you may end up bending the needle. So again, lightly let that go back into the plunger assembly there. All right, next step is to put your spring on. So we're going to slide that right over that reservoir there. Do the same thing for the other side. All right, got 2 springs installed. And then last, you're going to bring this this dash pot cover and slide it back on as well. Now there's going to be a retainer right here. You're going to want that spring to mount right into that retainer so it goes right around it. And you're going to slowly slide that back on as well. You don't want to push too hard because it shouldn't take much effort to slide it back on. If it does, you're doing something wrong. Alright, so now we got our dash pot covers back on. The next step is to kind of get a feel for what the floats feel like right now. Now, if you stick your finger right inside the intake on the back of the carburetor here, you'll try and move that float up, and it'll actually get stuck. You'll see a small ring appear up at the top, and you can push it back down. Now, it's going to sound really clunky right now because there's no good actuation. That means that there's not enough oil in it, and we're going to have to add a little bit to make sure that it smoothly actuates up and down. And the same thing goes for the other carburetor. You'll hear the clunking and it's just not actuating properly. So go ahead and get that filled up a little bit here. Now what I'm using to fill this up is just this small little oil can with a little lever. You can use whatever you'd like. You can get a little funnel, stick it in there and pour a little bit of oil down in there. I like this because I have a little bit more control over the oil that's going in. So what you're going to want to do is kind of place that tip or the funnel end into the reservoir that's actually retaining the oil. Now it's that secondary ring inside the dash pot cover. And so you're not going to need a whole bunch of oil, just maybe 1 or 2 good squirts. In this case, it looks like you actually might need a little bit more than 2 squirts. Now if you get a little too much in there, that's okay. There's a bleed valve that's on the top of the cover that we're going to put back on, and that'll allow the excess to come out. So I'm going to go ahead and fill up the second one as well. Now the main thing is that you put the exact same amount of oil in both of them. Now you don't need to get as specific, like down to the milliliter or anything like that, but just make sure that you have about the same amount of oil in both of the dash pots. That way that the float's going to actuate more smoothly on both and be in sync. Next step is to go ahead and put these plungers back in, and they just slide right back in and screw in. Alright, so now we've got both of our plungers back in, and we can start feeling the actuation on those plungers. So as you push up, make nice slow movements and you'll feel the difference with the oil inside that dash pot cover. This is extremely important that actuation is very smooth and fluid. That means that the motor is going to run much better. Now both of them should feel about the same, should have about the same amount of resistance. And if you have any excess oil, it's going to come out of this little hole right here. After you've done that, the only thing left to do is to return the filters to the car and then test fire the motor and see if it's running right. So let's go ahead and get those back on and we'll give it a start, make sure it works. Alright, everything's been returned to its original place. Some cars have a PCV valve. I took this off out of frame, but this valve reroutes your breather air back into the intake as your car's running. Helps keep the car a little less fumey. But if you don't have one, don't fret. You probably just have a plug on your intake manifold right there. Just make sure that hole's either plugged or this PCV valve is back on that hole. Otherwise, air is going to go past the carburetors and the car's not going to run properly. So that's shut. Filters are back on. Plungers are back in the dash pots. Let's give it a try. Alright, so the car, as you can see, is running pretty steady. I'm going to give it some throttle here, and we're going to check to make sure that the throttle actuation doesn't cause the car to cut out or have any weird behavior. Now when you give the car throttle, sometimes those floats will move up and more oil will press out. That's just the oil kind of seeping out and finding its happy place. Make sure that after you've run the car for a little bit and you've gone for a drive maybe around your neighborhood, open the hood back up and make sure that there's no excess oil on your manifold. Otherwise it's going to burn up and cause a little smoke. Other than that, car's running, we're ready to roll. Alright everyone, that's it for Classic Mini DIY today. Hope you learned a little something about your carburetors and how they work. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments below, and we look forward to seeing you soon.